You. Hi, my name is Liz Ritter. Some of you I've talked to many times over the years, and I'm the Deputy Director here at ANJAC. And I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro before we get started with our really wonderful presentations. So tonight is the second part of this webinar series of Thriving Through Change, Opportunities for Local Climate Action. And tonight we're talking about community engagement and risk communication. Just so you know, this session will be recorded and we will share the link with everybody that's registered. If you could put your questions in the Q&A box down below, we'll address them soon, and maybe we'll even read them at the end of the presentations. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to email us at info@anjac.org. And be ready to also, the presenters have been asking questions. Last session, if you were here, you might remember they've been putting some questions for you to answer in the chat to sort of share with everybody. So be ready for that. ANJAC's mission, most of you are familiar with us and what we do. Our Board of Trustees recently updated our mission to sort of make it clear that what we're doing is trying to preserve and protect natural resources for all people in New Jersey. And this is just a longer way of saying that. ANJAC offers a very powerful resource center with a lot of information, and we want to make sure you know about the resources we have available to you. We offer webinars and roundtable events. We have a quarterly ANJAC report. We have the digital news. And coming up in March, we have our annual fundamentals for environmental commissions, which will be starting, you'll start seeing those advertising soon. And of course, in the fall, we have our annual environmental congress. So we hope you can join us for some of those throughout the year. We look forward to seeing you. Upcoming events that are coming fairly soon. The next event we have is on February 6th. It's going to be a new year, new members webinar on recruiting for success. And then March 18th to 20th is going to be the virtual sessions for that fundamentals for effective environmental commissions course I mentioned. And we're going to do an in-person session of that same session on Saturday, May 3rd. We'll have details on that soon. And you can always check our website for other events that are coming up as they come. Don't forget your ANJAC membership, your municipal membership is renewable on a annual basis in January. So please don't forget to renew your membership if you haven't already. If you're not sure if it's been done, you can email us at info@anjac for information. And also ANJAC is a 501c3 nonprofit. And as you know, particularly now, things are going to be tight in nonprofits' budgets. So any personal donations you can make is certainly well appreciated. And again, today's presenters, I'm pleased to introduce both Megan Bushlow. She's a senior resilience planner at Arcadis Climate Adaptation and Resilience Planning. Thank you, Megan, for being here. And Elizabeth Mitchell, she was here 2 weeks ago also. She's a resilience planner at Arcadis Climate Adaptation and Resilience Planning. So thank you, ladies, so much for giving us your time and expertise. And I believe I am turning it over to Elizabeth.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Liz. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We can get started. Perfect. Okay, so today's webinar is focused on community engagement and risk communication. And as Liz mentioned, this is the second in our series, Thriving Through Change, Opportunities for Climate Action. My name is Elizabeth Mitchell, as Liz just mentioned, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Megan Bushlow. We hope that you all were able to join 2 weeks ago for the first session, but in case you couldn't make it or you want to revisit the information in the future, there is a recording that you can watch, and we look forward to continuing the discussion today. So today's webinar builds on part 1, and it dives into the importance of engagement and risk communication throughout the resilience planning process. At the end of today, we hope that you'll feel informed about why risk communication is an important part of resilience, be familiar with best practices in climate communication, feel empowered to take action, and then learn about some ways that you can apply risk communication in your community. So we'll spend some time today defining risk communication and talking about how communities can take action. We'll share some best practices, present a case study, and then finish with some Q&A. So if you were able to attend 2 weeks ago, this diagram will look familiar. Last time we talked about the steps to build local resilience, and we highlighted community engagement as a key part of the process that happens not just at one part of the resilience process, but at every stage of the process. This community engagement process can take many forms and can include public meetings, people giving feedback on projects, public art, and more. So today's webinar is focused on risk communication, which is a key part of the community engagement process. Risk communication contributes to community resilience by helping people understand climate risks and how they can mitigate those risks. And this risk communication process, like community engagement, should happen during many steps of the resilience planning process. So it helps leaders understand how community members perceive climate risks. It can provide methods to clearly discuss risk, can help leaders refine resilience strategies, and should be implemented alongside the planning project itself. So in short, risk communication is exchanging thoughts, perceptions, and concerns about hazards to identify and motivate appropriate action. And this matters because different people in your communities will have different perceptions of risk. And when we help people understand the realities of climate change related risk, it ends up being a way to improve resilience. And once people understand risk, they can themselves take some everyday actions that help them be prepared for hazards and reduce their individual climate risk. So over time, risk communication improves resilience starting at the individual level, moving on to the community level, and then it'll have ripple effects to community preparedness and disaster response. So when individual people understand climate risk, they can feel prepared and motivated to reduce risk through their everyday actions. So even though we all know climate change is a difficult subject to tackle, people have been shown that they're less anxious and afraid when they understand the climate change impacts. Also, when they are equipped with this information, they can feel empowered to take action to improve their personal preparedness to protect themselves and their families. And additionally, understanding this risk more clearly can help people feel more trust in the government intervention or organized events during hazard events. And then as individuals take action to reduce risk, the full community will benefit as disaster preparedness activities make their way into everyday life. So community members who understand the gravity of climate risk can advocate for better preparedness actions at the local level, and risk communication can help communities as people feel more responsibility and can collaborate to reduce risk over time. And as the community gains a better understanding of climate risk, there can be a reduced need for emergency services and improved resilience during disaster events. So communities can take steps to prepare for disasters in advance, and they can prepare before the event occurs rather than having to respond in the moment, which can lead to lower costs resulting from disasters. So this is obviously a big topic, and we're going to break down some individual and community actions during today's webinar. So today's webinar will focus on risk communication and community engagement using the steps you see in the diagram on the slide. Risk communication can help individuals understand climate risk and be better informed to provide feedback during the plan development process, as well as take individual actions to prepare for disasters. During the call today, we'll discuss each step highlighted below and how local leaders can advance the risk communication process. The steps are know your audience, establish best practices, develop visual content, test and implement the strategy, and enable engagement. And like last time, we'll dive into each of these steps during the rest of the time together. So a good starting point in this process is knowing your audience. Knowing your audience can help you understand community members' perspectives and interests, which may not necessarily be aligned with those of the local government. So by understanding how community members perceive climate hazards and risks, local leaders can understand the community's baseline understanding of climate change and also how people want the community to change and become more resilient in the future. So a good first step in understanding the characteristics that make your community your community. So what aspects of the community are most important to people, and how do people want the community to grow and change in the future? Additionally, it's important to understand how people see climate risks, like what opinions do people in the community hold about climate resilience, and how well do people understand future climate risks. And especially if your community has recently been affected by climate hazards, you can take note of which parts of the community were especially affected. So you can help identify climate vulnerabilities and how specific parts of the community may be important for outreach and risk communication. Then lastly, understanding where community members get their information about climate hazards and whether community members experience challenges around these information channels is an important way to set the groundwork for improved climate communication. So as you establish your community risk communication baseline, leaders can hold public working sessions to discuss climate risk with community members or publish tailored surveys to gauge community members' knowledge about climate risk. So providing a platform for community members to share this information directly is important to gather information, but also to start to open the conversation about climate risk between individuals and local leaders. So one note about this process, it's important to start to think about how vulnerable populations in your community are receiving information and interpreting it. For example, there might be different languages that people in your community speak, and it's important to share translated materials and, if possible, have interpreters available at meetings so you're reaching these populations. So the EPA flooded homes case study is a good example of this know your audience step to risk communication. This process involved EPA researchers bringing together a group of stakeholders to test communication methods for sharing information on air quality hazards that resulted from flooding. EPA used the SALT framework, which helped researchers understand participants' experiences with flooding and ensured the materials were tailored based on these experiences. And you can see on the slide that SALT is strategy, action, learning, and tools. So through feedback and focus groups, EPA created resources and refined them based on feedback from participants. There are some key takeaways from this project that can be applied to other broad risk communication projects. So in particular, this learning stage of EPA's projects demonstrates how starting by listening to participants can make risk communication materials much more effective based on people's actual lived experiences. The team ended up developing materials after holding focus groups and interviews, but the materials were the first draft rather than the final result. The EPA team made multiple iterations of the materials based on this continuing feedback, which made sure that the materials were suitable for the audience and reflected people's ideas. So after gaining an understanding of your audience, it's important to establish some communication guidelines that are suitable for your community and follow proven methods. There are lots of resources that are already available online that show best practices in risk communication, such as that EPA flooded homes document. And local leaders like environmental commissioners can compile best practices in risk communication that could be suitable for your community. And when you're communicating risk, it's important to start with the impacts. So you can flag some of the risks that are likely to or already do impact your community and focus on how this could affect things that your community cares about specifically. Then you can share information about what we know about climate risk, and you can acknowledge that there are some things we don't know. And even though the topic can be very scary and daunting, it's important to avoid this excessive doom and gloom and make sure your conversations are focused on how the community's actions can start to fill the knowledge gaps and address risk. When you speak with community members, the language you use is also really important. So make sure that your messaging is consistent and try to avoid jargony terms. Another key part of this is connecting information to people's day-to-day experiences and the places that are important to them in the community, and it can make that topic of climate risk more approachable. This image that's on the right shows some language best practices from a study that applied communication methods from COVID-19 to a climate change setting. So the study found that focusing on a common goal and some near-term benefits from climate action, as well as grounding the conversation in personal statistics, can help make climate conversations more approachable and more helpful for participants. In addition to the language you use when talking about climate risk, considering how you distribute the information is important and should be specific to your community. There are different communication channels that are suitable for different audiences, such as social media might be best for younger audiences, and posting flyers can reach people who frequent the specific community locations where you post the materials. And it's important to use a variety of channels to help people across your community and make sure that you include information in a variety of languages for this channel distribution as well. So as you think about how best to reach people in your community, we would invite you to share some information in the chat about what channels your community or your EC currently uses, and then also think about what channels might be helpful to reach vulnerable groups in the community. So we can pause for a second to brainstorm and then move on. Megan, I don't see the chat, but are we getting some responses?
Yeah, somebody said email, which, yeah, I didn't,
Oh, great.
if you can make a good email list, that's great.
That's a great tip. Perfect. Okay, thanks. Well, feel free to put more information in the chat as we move on too. So developing and sharing visual content is another important part of risk communication. And this step can help local leaders communicate really complex information that can be distributed through those channels we just talked about. So you can feel free to develop your own content, but there's definitely a lot of information already available for free online that's very effective, such as, the flyers shown on the right side of this page are an example of content that could be suitable for the whole community. And something like a residential toolkit or a mapping tool would be helpful for property owners who could take steps to mitigate risk to their specific properties. And then there are also things like tailored content for kids, like videos or posters that can help reach younger members of your community as well. So as you start to develop or search for visual content, there's some guidelines that can help make your content more effective and accessible. So colors could be used in the content to align with the tone of the message. So, you could use some blue text for emphasis for flooding or red text for warnings in your posters. And then also contrast and white space can help highlight key phrases and make the visuals less overwhelming. And images that are specific to your community can help people connect with the topic more deeply. And environmental commissions can share visual content on social media or other channels and can definitely advocate for the local government to do the same thing. So here's an example of a risk communication visual that is focused on heat risk mitigation. The language that's used in this visual assigns agency to homeowners, and the text on the image is helpful in framing the timeline for expected benefits of mitigation actions. Then those images and the bold text and that use of white space also make the image approachable. So this is one example of some things that this visual is doing well. So here's another example of a visual. What do you think are some parts of this visual that are effective? And do you have some ideas about what should be improved with this? We can pause here and have people put ideas in the chat. Again,
yeah.
oh,
We
yeah.
heard define the zone, so the flood zones in the middle picture are not defined. It's a good point.
Definitely.
We heard too much information in one chart.
Yeah, that top chart is really difficult to interpret, especially if you just have a moment to glance at it. I will say I like those suggestions that are at the bottom. I think having the bullet points listed like that is helpful, and it gives homeowners some specific action items. But there definitely are some things that could be improved about this. Okay, maybe we can move on to the next one. Here's another example. What do you think are some effective and ineffective aspects of this sign?
Looks like we haven't gotten anything in the chat yet. Let's give folks another minute.
Yeah.
Font sizes on the charts and Oh, that was from the previous
Here
one,
they
I think.
come, here they come, yeah.
Also for this one,
Yeah, this
I
one we're
like
here.
that. Oh, go ahead, Megan.
I was gonna say some mixed feedback. Busy bottom, font size a little small, but generally concise information, and the QR code is helpful for more information. I think those are good points.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also like that this picture seems to be a community specific image. We don't have the context of where this image is compared to the scenery, but I would imagine that it's showing what you're seeing in real life. So I feel like that's pretty effective to see how high water could get compared to maybe where you're standing in the moment as well when you're looking at that. Okay,
Yeah.
here's one last example. What do people think is effective and ineffective about this one?
Also getting some mixed feedback here. Some feedback that it's busy and hard to read and just a lot of information. But also some positive feedback about the pictures, the importance of that for people who may not speak English. The kind of overall organization with stages. Heard feedback about the doom and gloom. That's something that we think about a lot in our messaging is to try to avoid that theme. But I think overall the graphic representation of this is standing out as something that's really effective.
Great. Perfect. Thank you all for your feedback. Okay, so the next step, once you have your draft visual developed, it's time to start testing this information with a core group and starting to think about refining the materials to get more engagement over time. So by going through this iterative process, you can help find gaps in the messaging, and you can also make sure that the final visuals are suitable for the community because you've gone through multiple rounds of refinement and heard feedback from people at multiple stages of the development process. So environmental commissions could be the ones who are leading those testing activities, or you can act as participants and provide feedback on gaps in messaging as people who both have the environmental background, but are also important members of the community. So as leaders begin testing, you can establish a baseline of climate risk and risk mitigation options. So you could ask questions and give participants time to respond. You can ask them whether the materials that you've provided are giving a base level of knowledge about the content and where gaps might be. So for example, what did the materials explain well and what was confusing? And you can also ask whether participants are feeling ready and empowered to apply the information they learned. So what resources are available to residents and how could community members feel like they can implement these processes that you've outlined. So as we move forward through the next couple slides, you can brainstorm some other questions that might be important to include during testing. We might already be getting some. I can't see the chat, but I see that there are notifications coming up.
I do see one actually really good point is it says, I don't believe this should be a final form. Your point about this being an iterative process is very important, and the results mean that this is a constantly evolving product. So yes, never think that you've got the final one. Don't be afraid to adjust it as you move along. There's a great point. Thank you.
So one important part of this process is leaving time for respondents to think about the questions. So you can listen to their responses and make sure you understand how the materials need to change to be more effective by asking follow-up questions or getting more feedback throughout. Yes, again, this is an iterative process, so you can ask more questions throughout the session and make sure that you can repeat the testing session with more groups of people so your final visual reflects their feedback and is tailored to the community's needs based on this feedback. So once the materials have been developed, local leaders can empower the community to engage with climate risk information and educate one another. So this process might look different in different communities. So your community might find that public art is a great way to inform people about climate risk, and maybe community meetings are a great forum for people to grapple with this idea of resilience and talk with their neighbors. So environmental commissions play an important role in communicating climate risk. ECs can provide guidance on policy action related to resilience on the local level. You can assess and highlight gaps in existing resilience materials. You can research best practices in risk communication, and you can yourself participate in the risk communication process. And feel free to add more ideas in the chat about how ECs can communicate climate risk. But now I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who's going to spotlight a resilient NJ climate risk communication process.
Thank you. Yes, and so I'll be sharing a little bit of a risk communication strategy that we call the Faces of Resilience campaign that was part of the Resilient Northeastern New Jersey or Resilient NENJ program. It's part of the larger umbrella program supported by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. We shared a little bit more about the program in the first webinar, so definitely invite folks to go check back for more about the general information. But so this Faces of Resilience campaign was part of a broader risk communication strategy that we've informally been calling Resilience 101, a Resilience 101 campaign. And before diving into it, I do really want to emphasize that this was something that was led by a lot of the creative leadership for this effort was from the nonprofit organization Ironbound Community Corporation and a public art administrator who they hired, Delilah Navarro, but who has changed roles and wasn't able to make it here today. So honored to be able to highlight this work. And this work was completed in the cities of Jersey City, Newark, Hoboken, and Bayonne, who make up the resilient Northeastern New Jersey region, alongside ICC, Ironbound Community Corporation, as a partner, and also Hudson County is involved. So this work was a multifaceted, multimedia, multi-channel. We were talking before about different best practices and incorporating different channels. So this effort actually wove together different media channels as part of the work. And the goal was to promote overall awareness about the Resilient Northeastern New Jersey program, to spread information about climate hazards, and also really to foster community involvement in that process. So the overall concept for this was driven by community feedback from a community advisory council that helps contribute to the program. So it's a group of residents from each of these cities, and they really highlighted the value of public art as a strategy for engagement, as something that's really exciting and helps to drive enthusiasm, and as a way to bring people together and have connectivity. So those are the overall themes of this work, and I'll share a little bit about what it looked like, and would love to hear any questions and can talk about that more. So the main component of Faces of Resilience was a mural art project, and ICC worked with local artists in Jersey City, Newark, and Hoboken to design these murals and identify locations in high traffic areas. So the photo in the center there is one of the murals that was created at, well, it's a blank canvas, but we have pictures that I can point to with the completed mural. This was in Newark Riverfront Park, and the photo on the right is another example in Jersey City near the Holland Tunnel. So the idea was to have these be spaces that would really be seen, and the individual murals incorporated actual faces of local leaders. So there's an example in the left picture there, and on the right, incorporated faces of local leaders, of the community advisory council members. And the idea was really to uplift these community members and the work that they do. And that was complemented by a video series that had interviews with the individual community members, where they had the opportunity to speak about why they're so passionate about climate resilience and what it means to them, and the trends and priorities for their communities. And so each of the murals had a QR code that directed to the website and has more information about the videos and the project work. And then the last component of this effort was a series of educational workbooks that were really graphically pleasing, and there were 5 different age ranges available, and the idea was to have activity-based worksheets for youth, for students, could be used at schools or other programs to spread awareness, and also start to get youth to think about solutions for climate resilience. So those were the kind of 3 components, and there were also events and opportunities to meet the artists and celebrations for when the murals were created. So it was really exciting to see a lot of the cohesion and networking that was created through this program. And this work was mostly completed from 2022 to 2023, but the murals are still there and live on. And I'll drop a link to our website where you can go and read more if you're interested. Oh, Nikki already dropped the link, so you can check that out. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Megan. And if people have questions about the process, or maybe if there are people who live in these communities and want to share a little bit about what it's like to see these murals every day, feel free to put that in the chat. So now we're going to move on to a brainstorming activity to see how we can apply some things that we've discussed today to a fictional community. So this town, Anytown, New Jersey, is facing some severe flooding, and local leaders are trying to help community members understand risk and resilience actions that they could take in the community. So this messaging has not been super effective so far in the community. So some people are busy and don't feel like they have the time to consider climate risk. Some people don't really know how to address climate risk and feel overwhelmed with the issue. And a few community members don't see climate-related flooding as an issue that is changing, or maybe don't see climate change as an issue at all. So I'm interested in hearing how some people would respond in this scenario. So you can either address some of the individuals' perspectives or this full town strategy. So we'll pause here for a few minutes to see what ideas you might have. You can get us started on one of the first ones. Yeah. Was what, sorry, Megan, what was that?
Oh, we just got a comment. Isolate a few general steps that all in the community can take, make them simple, and give them a chance to respond.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe with the person who has other demands in their life and can't spend time thinking about flooding, that's where something like a mural or some kind of passive climate risk communication would be really effective, because that's something this person might see every day, doesn't really have to think about the actions or, you know, the issue itself, but will over time absorb it.
Got a comment to highlight the economic impacts as something that makes it really tangible for people and drives home the impacts for individual residents. Oops, getting lost in the chat. Feedback about communicating a sense of urgency while also keeping things actionable. That's something that we hear about a lot, is in addition to providing information, always making sure to drive home how residents can get involved, what steps they can take, and how they can either take direct action or advocate.
Yeah, that's a great one, especially thinking about the timeline. You know, 2100 might feel way too far in the future for people, but something as near as, you know, flooding that's already happening or flooding that will happen in 2030 can make that timeline feel more real.
Yeah, also just scrolling through, I don't think we'll be able to touch on all of these, but seeing a good point about sharing real life examples and centering the communication in actual events that have happened. And also emphasizing positive examples of disaster prevention. I
Great,
like this,
thank
the
you all
sense
so
that we are.
much.
Yeah, Steve has a good comment about how make sure you promote that we're all in this together, that everybody's got to work at it. And that's a great idea. That's also a good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's a
even
great point.
one person shared they're pushing rain gardens and community gardens, which again is a thing that you can actually see and appreciate. And, you know, put a sign up and tell them why this rain garden, what this rain garden is doing is great, right?
Love that. Yeah, that's a great one as kind of a double benefit when you're getting some of that, flood control as you're capturing the water, but also it's such a community beautification effort as well. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for sharing, and feel free to put more information in the chat as well as we go forward. So as you think about how to implement those risk communication best practices, there are a lot of opportunities in your communities that could be great for this type of engagement. So some possible locations could include farmers markets or town meetings or events like festivals, local libraries. And it's also a great idea to partner with local government leaders who can provide some opportunities to hold events that are focused on the subject itself. So we will take a moment and pause here to see if there are other partners that you can identify in your community who would be great for climate risk communication, and some locations that could be great to host these climate risk communication practices.
I'm seeing senior centers, scouting groups, Audubon societies, school programs, faith-based organizations. All great ideas.
It's a great idea. Perfect. Okay, so we have a couple of resources that we can spotlight over the next couple slides. So the first one is this NOAA Digital Coast Risk Communication website. This is a great hub that has a lot of information about risk communication, has some of those pre-made materials that we talked about earlier, and as you can see, has these super helpful sections broken down by trainings, how you can understand your audience, kind of the best practices that you can approach, visuals, and then like ready-made visuals, but then also if you want to make your own visuals, they have some guidance for that. So would definitely recommend checking out that website. This website is the C40 Cool Cities Network. This is a really interesting initiative, and it has some case studies and best practices on how you can reach groups in your community that might be vulnerable to the specific risks. So this one was specific to heat risk, and it uses these case studies from cities and how they dealt with heat risk and communication, and also was developed during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it has some interesting kind of intersectional cross-issue resources that could be helpful for approaching this big issue of climate change. Then another great resource, as always, is FEMA, which has communications toolkits that you can use in your community. So you can see that there are guidebooks for officials, information that's specific to different communities, such as rural communities, and then also this disaster multimedia toolkit. Those are just some examples of what they have on their website, but would highly recommend people check that out. So we're winding down the content now, but wanted to make sure that we mention this conclusion. So overall, this has been a lot of information to discuss, but local leaders can work to tailor risk communication content to their specific communities. And environmental commissions play a really important role in risk communication, and you can highlight resilience, share best practices, and communicate information through the different channels you have, as well as advocate for more risk communication opportunities in the community. So I know we have some time left and we can open it up to some questions.
If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, or I might be able to find some in the chat. You guys have been so good about putting the chat. If there's a question there, I might not find it, but if you put them in the Q&A, or we will try to get to them soon. I'm going back through the chat now, Megan and Elizabeth. I'll be right there.
We have a
We got a-
question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say about police and fire departments being engaged in these efforts. Yeah, it definitely varies by community. These departments oftentimes it depends on the structure of the municipality, but if the police are integrated with the Office of Emergency Management, we really see them being heavily involved in this, and are often the folks who are involved in hazard mitigation planning and who are really active on social media and in spreading, warnings and watches in advance of events and where to go for resources. So that's how we've seen, at least. I don't know if Elizabeth, you or Sheila or Liz, you have other thoughts on that, but would also love to hear from everyone in the chat if they have other ideas as well.
We have a question here. Many years ago, lead-based paint hazards were required to be revealed to renters and new buyers. So can the risk of catastrophic flooding be required in housing purchases? Oh, and we already got an answer. Nick Angarone has put in a link there to the flood disclosure, the flood risk notification that's required.
Yes, and that was a big recent success in 2023.
Yeah, somebody's saying they have a volunteer fire department, so that's a little bit different. They're probably not involved in OEM, but there's no reason you can't reach out to them. And a matter of fact, a lot of them they have meetings at their buildings and stuff and get together pretty often, and people would probably come to a meeting there and hear about some stuff. So I wouldn't say never. I mean, certainly it's worthwhile to reach out.
Yeah, and to the question about climate communication and climate resilience training, I think the links that are provided in this presentation can point you to a lot of different resources. There is also a lot of information about climate projections available through the NJDEP website and the climate change strategy for New Jersey, which we can also link.
Yeah, and it varies so much by town in New Jersey. Like Steve is saying, their volunteer fire departments are very engaged, so it varies, but it's always something that can be worked on, certainly. Steve also brings up the fact, and how do you deal with this, where the people that are sort of out of the way of the floods and don't really feel like it matters to them, don't really relate, they don't think it's personally relevant. What's a good way to communicate with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that's when some of this kind of community collaboration effects can come and make a big difference by emphasizing that everyone is in it together, that people who are in your community who are affected are, part of your community and are important people, and the places that are being affected are also critical to parts of the community. Megan or Sheila or Liz, I don't know if there's anything else to add.
I totally agree. Yep, absolutely. Have to think outside the box sometimes to make people sort of get ready to pay attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys, I mean, this chat has been filled with some wonderful ideas that I'm sure I never thought of. So I'm sure a lot of other people are hopefully getting good information for themselves to go back to their towns with. We have message from Stephanie, the teacher, saying she's about to teach an elective at the high school level about truth and climate change and wanting to involve students in activism. Do you, do you think the thoughts on whether or not the students should have the same kinds of guidelines in the community, or do you see the role of young people differently given their age?
Interesting question. I feel like young people have a super important role to play, especially when they're learning information and then maybe sharing it with their parents or trusted adults in their lives. So that's a great way of getting information to move from younger people up throughout the community, no matter what age.
Yeah, and the work that we've been doing through the Resilient New Jersey program, we've heard a lot of interest from residents directly in the desire to see programming for students and really empowering them to get involved and viewing them as the leaders of today and tomorrow. So really excited for that programming that you'll be leading, Stephanie.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, they are. The young folks they're energized too. If you get them energized, there's no stopping them. Seeing anything else in there, Sheila? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble scrolling around.
Yes, over in the Q&A, concerns about FEMA going away under the Trump administration. What can we do about this? So far, we have contacted our senators.
Yeah, this is a big
Yeah,
question.
that's a big question of the day. And yeah, generally that's exactly what we would suggest doing is advocating, but also trying, not to get lifted up by the frenzy. And we think that, the next few weeks may feel chaotic, but hopefully things will be settling down and all of us on the line, and I'm sure everyone participating will be monitoring as well. But to someone's comment before about hope and how we can instill that in the work that we do, I think, there's a lot of positivity, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and we're part of networks of people who are all really enthusiastic about that work. So just important to hold on to that.
Yeah. And a good reminder of how important local level action is as well.
Well, and that also circles back to those projects you were showing us with the artwork, where you're beautifying the community at the same time and, giving people something beautiful to look at and hope, really, but the fact that there is still beautiful things to see and that their community creates beautiful things is even more circling back again to protect what we've created. So thank you. I see that there's another question popped in there, Sheila. You want to read that one?
Sure. Who is charged with evaluating on a county by county basis how prepared we are and how climate resilient we are?
Yeah, that seems like something that would be good since Nick is on, if we're able to promote him to a panelist. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't really a higher level comparison of county by county in terms of evaluating that. But there are certain measures, like at the local level, to integrate climate change assessments into municipal planning as an example.
Let's see. I don't know if putting him on the
Yeah,
spot.
Nick.
This is what I get for commenting.
Yeah.
Technically, no one is tasked with, formally tasked with evaluating how vulnerable you are, certainly long-term from a climate resilience perspective. Your county hazard mitigation office and the state hazard mitigation office of emergency management will perform, regularly performs a hazard mitigation analysis in their hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. That gets updated, but that is relatively short term. So no one is technically tasked with doing a longer term evaluation. That is something that the state tries to do not at a at a county-wide scale, but at a multi-municipal scale, which Megan and Elizabeth have referenced some of our work through the Resilient NJ program. But that is similarly reliant on federal funding. And so there, we have limited opportunities to do that. But yeah, then this is, to a couple of the comments, I'll just say, right, don't just talk to your federal elected officials. Make sure you talk to your local and your state elected officials, who also, have who can also not only advocate with your federal, with the federal elected officials, but also at their own level and at the state level.
Good point, and thanks for letting us put you on the spot, Nick. I didn't do it. Somebody said.
I saw who said it.
I'm sorry, Sheila, have you been, I haven't tried to scroll around again. Have you found anything else we need to circle
No,
back to?
I think we got to everything.
So
Yep.
just so you know, we will also share the transcript of the chat because there's so much good information in there that you guys might want to see again. You people that have been here and even people that missed it for ideas, and you guys have really been great about sharing your ideas and things you're doing. So it's wonderful. Are we oh, okay, somebody's saying thank you. So I will say thank you then. Thank you to Megan and Elizabeth, and of course, Nick and Nikki, for being here with us. This is the second session. You guys have done a great job on both these sessions, really given our
Terrific.
members and the Environmental Commission, the local officials, really good tools to go out into their communities. And we will definitely tell them to keep in touch with you if they have any other questions, and we will keep in touch. So thank you again for your time. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your positivity. Have a good night.